is so exciting because we're moving now into this brand new panel that came out in the end of 2020. And you have this training course. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. So this, if you're listening to the audio version of this, this will be available on the show notes page. It'll be available on YouTube. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And because it's my data, I can share it. And we're going to actually walk through the endocannabinoid panel, and we're going to kind of talk through, okay, so this is my genes, but what could I do about it? And what are some ways that I can optimize my health? Are you guys ready? All right, David, I'm going to share my screen. You let me know if you can see it. Tried to pull it up. Here we go.
Great.
So I'm going to just allow people to see this beautiful format that we have here in the Aperion Zoe app. And this is the panel that David created. And again, we didn't even go into all of the work that you put into doing this. I'm going to let you take it away, and I'll click the mouse or the panel wherever you want to go. But I'm so excited, and let's just run with this.
Yeah, sure. So this is the kind of broad overview, what you're looking at right now, of all the different sections in the report. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see there's another section here. And what this is a collection of all of the different genes and variants that are known about how your body responds differently from person to person to cannabinoids. And it also looks at how your body creates its own endocannabinoids and receptors. And if you're listening and wondering exactly what this even means, the endocannabinoid system is a system in the body that really was only discovered pretty recently. And this is what THC, CBD from the cannabis plant kind of works with. And it's also a regulatory system that the body uses just on its own. You create your own cannabinoids. And so all these sections are looking at different factors that can help you understand, how to use cannabinoids or cannabis products to the most effective, the most helpful for your body, and also look at some potential risk factors and ways to just optimize use. And also, because the endocannabinoid system is not just about cannabis, there are other herbs and other things that you might be able to use to, say, improve stress response or improve cognitive function, things like that are in this report.
Awesome. Should we go right into endocannabinoid levels?
Yeah, why don't we do that? And we can look at some factors there.
And I'll just say this is great for the user because there's this background information. There's a video from David. Okay, I'll let you take it away, David, as we get into the SNPs and so on.
Sure. So, and this is the first time I'm seeing your genes also, just for everyone who's listening. So this is looking at factors that influence how your body creates its own endocannabinoids. These are molecules that are shaped very similarly to the cannabinoids found in the cannabis plant, but they're native to your body. And anandamide is the one you can see on the top that Catherine has both lower levels of anandamide, lower levels of 2-AG. And these are the two main cannabinoids the body creates. And anandamide is more involved in the central nervous system, in the brain. It's more related to mental health and anxiety and stress response. And then 2-AG is found in the brain, but it's also in the rest of the body. And this is what is more responsible for immune function and organ function and communication between other systems in the body. So this is an indication that for you, Catherine, having some support for your cannabinoid levels might be helpful. And there's different strategies to do that. CBD is certainly one. CBD helps raise anandamide levels in the body. The herb maca is actually also something that can help raise anandamide levels. And exercise actually is also one of the best ways to boost these. And that doesn't surprise me that there's a natural feedback loop for you, that when you exercise, it really reinforces the feeling good from that. And what's interesting is, they used to attribute the runner's high, or the feeling of, that kind of buzz after after exercise solely to endorphins. But what they now know is anandamide is actually a major player in triggering that response too. So it's part of the feel-good response from exercise.
That's so cool. I will tell you, I had maca in my breakfast this morning. I made this like incredible nutritious shake. And then I started taking CBD before bed, a special blend that I get from an incredible place. And yeah, I think it really, really helps. But so I did learn a lot. Like this is really fun for me to go through this with you and kind of add to this idea that if you know these little things and you can tweak them. I mean, David, I used to suffer from terrible insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really interesting. Should I go to the next one? This is so fun.
Yeah, let's look at the stress response section, and we'll look at it from this perspective.
I'm like really bearing it all, aren't I? Oh, here's my snips, everybody. Ah!
Yeah, thank you for being willing to share. So you're someone who's probably, from an endocannabinoid perspective, probably got a pretty naturally good or balanced stress response. And we're looking at a combination of cannabinoid receptor genes that have been studied in isolated lab settings where, say, they expose someone to a startling event and then see how long it takes them to come back to baseline. And that's what the fear extinction readout there in the middle is. Some people have a very difficult time coming back to, a calm, measured nervous system tone. And that would be on kind of the opposite variant. But because you have the lower amounts of cannabinoids in general, some extra cannabinoid stimulation or support is probably going to be pretty helpful just to balance that. And, that might be showing up in your sleep, like you mentioned.
Love it. Okay. So good on that. We'll go to, this is so fun. I didn't even know we were going to go through this level of detail, but this is going to be amazing.
Yeah, let's go to the let's look at the THC and CBD metabolism sections. I feel like that'll be pretty
Oh, it's pretty crazy for me. You're going to love it. I'm such a good case study for this. Okay, so here we go. Are you ready? I know the results, but
so you're a slow THC metabolizer. So tell me, if you're willing, how that is translated to your experience and understanding of how your body responds to THC.
Okay, I will tell you, I am terrified to try. Like when I was in Colorado, I was going to try, I was going to go to a dispensary and try some, but I didn't because I was worried that I would have some kind of, anxiety or something like that. So I don't actually know how I respond to THC.
Perfect. This is great then. This is the exact perfect use case of this, because we can kind of predict what your response might be. And honestly, that may be some really helpful intuition that was coming up for you, because the slow THC metabolism does tend to have the most extreme, exaggerated response to it.
When you say that exaggerated response, it was just funny. I was at a conference. It was over a year ago. And I mentioned to somebody, I said, oh, it's legal in this state. I was thinking of going and buying some. And it was, there was a lot of mental health workers there. And they said, you should really be careful because you could get, panicky or feel really anxious. And then I just sort of decided, okay, I don't want to do that. But is that what you mean by an adverse response to it? Is sort of, I've worked with people that have reported things like, paranoia, and then they're in coaching and needing support because of that. But I'm curious, kind of, is that because why is it because it's slow could create these reactions? I'm so confused about how these are connected.
Yes, good question. So there's a couple different factors, and the metabolism piece is one of them. And then there's also some genes we can look at related specifically to paranoia, anxiety responses. And with the slow THC metabolism, what this is really talking about is how you break down THC when you take it into your system. And people that are slow metabolizers tend to not break it down very well. You're going to carry variants that are in the liver that make it so that you don't produce a lot of the enzymes that break down THC, which means you're going to have more buildup in your system. It means a small amount is going to be very impactful. It's going to go a long way, as opposed to someone who's a faster metabolizer that breaks down THC quickly and inactivates it. And, they can generally tolerate higher amounts. So this is where you see slow metabolizers, like in the studies, they report a much higher um, subjective response to the same amount of THC as a fast metabolizer. They report it lasts longer. They report it's more intense. And so, the notion that you had that, okay, I want to be very careful with this is actually very smart. That's what I would recommend to someone who has a slow metabolism, is that you want to go very slow. You want to go very low amounts of THC and just really see how your body reacts. Like, you're not going to be someone that could handle probably the same amount that most other people can. If most people respond well to, say, a 10 milligram edible, you probably want to take about a fifth of that to start, right? You want to really start very low because your body's naturally going to just not break that down. And it's going to circulate more. And it's going to be more potent for you as opposed to other people.
And I'm going to bring this home, literally, because I'm going to talk about something in my family, but also kind of talk about what's going on in our world around this substance. Because in my state, it is illegal. We are actually one of the, I think, last 2 states where we haven't decriminalized it, right? So it's a big deal here. And here's where I'm going to bring it home. So I ran this report for my son. He's going to be 18 in April, and he will be going off to school pretty soon. And so he has not, he has not used, THC or cannabis. And one of the things that was really helpful for me, and now, David, after talking to you, even more helpful, so there could be ongoing conversations, is if he goes to a state like Washington and Colorado. I mean, these are all states that we're looking at for college, where it's legal, where it's ubiquitous, right? For him to have this level of understanding, it kind of goes back to those early mantras that we were talking about knowing your body,
Mm-hmm.
and embracing this idea of fine tuning. Like, I think it's actually, for if there's parents listening and they might be in the same situation as me, where they care about their kids. They know that their kids are going to go out and try and be their own people, but to potentially empower them with like specific information that says, hey, this is what's going on with your body, and this is what it might mean. And just good to know.
Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite things to do is to do reports for kids and their parents, because most kids are curious. They're going to try things, and having that personalized information, like you said, gives people the opportunity to use it in a way that's right for them. And I'll say that I've done reads with this information for people that have been using cannabis regularly for 30 years, and it still gives them the ability to fine tune it. It still gives them the ability to say, wow, my body is different compared to these people. And if I'm going to socially, partake in THC with other people, like, I actually, now have a guide that I can actually show other people and say, actually, you know what, I'm good. I don't need to feel pressured into doing more than I should. And I think that's one of the really valuable pieces is, knowing your body in a way where you can say, yeah, this is the right amount, or this is not for me, or this is great for me, and really choose based on what's right for you, not what's expected of you, or what you're told should happen.
Well, I love that. And I love how we're getting into some really actionable advice. And so here, this would really be a takeaway around, okay, now that I know this about myself, if I were in a situation where, I wanted to try it in a legal setting, then I would just have to be very, very careful, very, very cautious, and know that about myself. And then, David, when we get into the CBD metabolism, this is where it's going to get, I'm sure you're going to have some really cool biohack around it. Because should I go there? Because it's like, okay,
yeah, let's go there, because one of the things that is important, like you mentioned, is the polygenic approach. And so the THC section, right?
Yeah,
is going to also kind of be in relationship to the CBD metabolism. And so here, yeah, it's interesting.
We're laughing because we're looking at the complete opposite of my results. So, David, I'll let you explain.
Right. So you have, you're more prone to have an ultra fast metabolism of CBD, meaning that you break it down really quickly. So for you, you're someone that is probably going to need higher amounts of CBD in general to get results, get the things that you want out of it. And one of the things from a subjective perspective, when you combine THC with CBD, is that CBD can tend to smooth things out and actually reduce some of that potential for paranoia, anxiety, some of the negative effects of THC. But what's important for you to know is that because you break down THC slowly and you break down THC really quickly, you probably want to lean even more heavily towards a high CBD, low THC kind of product or strain if you're going to use THC, because that will help eliminate some of the potential turbulence there. That will kind of smooth things out. And in general, if you compared someone with a fast CBD metabolism to someone with a slow metabolism, someone with a slow metabolism, is going to be able to take a much smaller amount, and their body is going to respond more strongly to it, as opposed to someone who has a fast metabolism where it's just not going to stick around as much.
So interesting. Yeah, and I was kind of, when I was looking at this, so you mentioned strains. I actually didn't know that. I know that it's a plant, so there's got to be, hundreds of varieties and things like that. But that's interesting, where you can actually, go to a dispensary and have a conversation with them about this type of, metabolism and specific genetics. And, maybe there's a way to actually get a strain that matches one's genetics. That's a really interesting thought. Another thing is, if somebody, you tell me, David, because I don't really know, but if somebody were to try, a product with THC and CBD in it, and knowing that the THC is going to be around for a long time, if they're a slow metabolizer, would you then say, and I don't even know what long means, like hours or whatever, but then would you say, well, you can, add with a different product, with a CBD product, sort of as the CBD wears off, to kind of, you mentioned smooth out the experience. And you can tell I'm like a deer in the headlights here. I'm probably a good candidate for this conversation.
Yeah, that is actually something that could be a potentially good idea. If there is a really sustained kind of thing to dose a little bit of CBD for someone with a slow metabolism, sure. And this is one of those things where this type of reporting will give you just the idea to even try that, right? Like, this is something that you could experiment with, and without it, you would just kind of not even know that would be a possibility of something to try. So ultimately it comes down to the N of one and what your body is, how you respond to it. But that's a good thought. I really like that, actually.
I love that. Just like your chaga mushroom tea, like when you can find these things that make you feel so much better with just this little tweak, that's what we're really looking for. So I know you had mentioned, anxiety, panic. Do we want to go to another panel here? I don't want to leave that out there because that's such an important one.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that and see where that shows up for you, because that's a big factor.
Is that this report, or is it the?
Yes, this is this report.
Okay, so we're on the THC subjective response. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So, overall, you're probably going to see a pretty decent mood response from THC, more likely to feel good from it. But there is some potential for the anxiety, paranoia, right? And this is not necessarily saying you're going to get anxiety or paranoia. It's more saying you need to be aware of when and how you're doing it. What are the surroundings like? What's your mental state going into it? Because cannabis, THC, I love the term that Stan Groff came up with. That's non-specific amplifier. It's like a lot of other psychoactives where it's tends to amplify whatever's there in your psyche. So just knowing that can be the source of anxiety and paranoia for some people. But then some people also just have a really incompatible time with cannabis, with THC, and it's a little bit different, right? It's like picking apart, hey, there might be some stuff cannabis brings up, and there also just might be some real physiological stuff going on that's going to drive you into an anxiety state. For you, I would suspect that the dosing is probably going to be the most important thing for you, and just knowing that you don't want to go too far too fast with it, and not trigger the propensity here for that anxiety and paranoia. Whereas someone who had, say, a higher risk factor, not in the middle on the extreme edge, that's where you'd say, yeah, you probably really want to stick to low THC or no THC. But for you, it's more about the dosage. It's more about really just finding the right amount, more so than anything, I'd say.
So on that cannabis-induced anxiety, paranoia scale that we see there, if you see somebody all the way over in the gray, right, on the right-hand side, and you're coaching them, are you going to tell them, to stay away from cannabis? Like how would you manage that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so it's always a conversation about what that person wants, right? If they want to be using it, they like it, then it's a conversation, and maybe they have some negative times with it, then it's a conversation of, all right, how do we mitigate those negative responses? Maybe it is finding specific strains that are low THC. Maybe it's using certain terpenes that are also in the cannabis profile, which are the things that create the flavor and the smell of cannabis. They actually can really shift and modulate the experience. All right, so that's something we might talk about. But yeah, for someone who is not attached to using THC, it's probably helpful to get that understanding and say, yeah, this probably really isn't for you. And there's also the mental health risk section on here that looks more at things from a psychosis risk factor that we also want to factor in, as far as not just little bouts of anxiety or paranoia while you're high, but potentially really negatively impactful things that is going to last beyond just the hour or two that you're stoned.
Yeah, well, and we can definitely go there. And I just want to point out too that you mentioned the terpenes and you mentioned other things. What I loved about your course is this isn't sort of like a hammer, like meaning like and everything's a nail, right? You're not saying, well, this would be great or this would, like, what I love about the materials that you presented is it's everything from adding a little bit of something or just helping people, like if somebody's addicted, to look at their genes and then to titrate and support them as they reduce use. And when I did my addiction coursework, it was all about harm reduction. And so I really resonated with what you were talking about in the course materials for people that might be on this thing where they're like, I'm using too much. And then you're looking at the genes from a perspective of how to support that person to make a change. Because you said when it comes down to it, it's about what they, what they want. What do they want for themselves and in their lives?
Right, exactly. It's funny. I work with people that both want to use more cannabis and learn how to do it well, and I work with people that want to use less and get away from that habit and pattern. So this is helpful for both sides because you can really get a feel for what are the things that might be kind of attracting someone to cannabis in the first place. Are there physiological things that it's balancing for them that maybe we could do in a different way? Maybe you could substitute other compounds, like for example, and I'll just use this as an example, like some people are self-medicating sleep or pain or inflammation, and when they take the cannabis away, they feel crappy because they're actually physiologically medicating that, and it turns into also the psychological addiction, like, I need this thing. And it becomes much easier to break that habit if you're supporting what you're medicating physiologically, right? If you're doing something else to reduce inflammation or support sleep, then all of a sudden the cannabinoids lose their appeal in a way because there's something else doing that. And that's very helpful to look at and say, all right, we're probably able to kind of give you something else to titrate that, like you said.
So interesting. I love it. It's the Aperion systems approach of looking at the body. So let's look at that. I don't know if it was the psychosis profile or
Mm-hmm.
is that the last one? Is that the
It's this. It should be the next one here.
Okay. Oh, sorry, my computer should be faster than it is. I should have just slipped forward, but here we go. Mental health risk from THC use. Very important stuff. Okay.
Okay, so you're on the minimal side. So this is something that, I wouldn't be concerned for you about. Even most people that come out kind of in the middle, I'm, a little more cautious, but you really want to look at family history with this as far as, if you have history of schizophrenia or psychosis, there's a much higher risk. But THC is generally safe for most people, but there's a small amount of people that it does seem to trigger, a break from reality that goes beyond, just being high. So this is something that I think is very helpful for parents, very helpful for people that haven't used cannabis before, especially if there's any concern around mental health risk. And, this is something that I've actually been very pleased with, I think, the overall shift in the cannabis community around being willing to talk about this. When I first started writing about this a few years ago, it felt like I was like a pariah or someone, kind of like throwing a wrench in the legalization gears. Because this is information that seen on the surface seems like it would be counter to, decriminalization, legalization, but it's actually something that, as someone who's, pro cognitive liberty, pro legalization, decriminalization, and personal use, and all that, I feel like it's actually really important to also talk about the risks along with the potential benefits, and not just whitewash it. And it does the whole movement, does the whole plant a disservice to pretend like, some people aren't going to have negative responses to it. When there's so much information coming out about the benefits and about the potential positive impacts for people. And so it's the nuance, it's the looking at the individual response. And, this is something that I'm really proud to be able to offer people, because I feel like it actually really gives people one of the most important things to look for with, what are the most important potentials that might really kind of mess things up in the long run. So, yeah, it's nice to see that, though, isn't it? To know, I don't have to really worry about that for you.
Yeah, especially because I have been so cautious, and gosh, I mean, what you have done.